The Roman Empire is arguably one of the most powerful empires of all time, but like so many other empires, it crumbled into not much more than a memory. The main reasons for said crumble include the debasing of the coinage, which led to overtaxation and price inflation, power of the landowners and not the central government, depopulation, and inter-military issues. In the end, all of these inner conflicts allowed for the overthrowing of the Western Roman Empire and helped the Western Roman Empire crumble before, during, and after these conflicts. Many argue that the end of the Western Roman Empire truly started with the beginning of the reign of Diocletian, the emperor that came out of and ended the chaotic age of the soldier emperors. He found it necessary to try and resolve the problems that had been clear in the time before his reign.
Out of this time of inner economic chaos, a new leader emerged, the landowners, who controlled large country estates, or villas. As their extensive lands could produce more than enough to sustain all the people on it, they were mainly self-sufficient. The leftover harvest would be given as taxes paid in goods, or would go into the marketplace. The only industries still intact in Western Rome were the ones selling Roman necessities such as grain or olive oil. These landlords made most of the profit that was to be made, as they were the only ones still producing individually. Everyone else was slowly falling into debt through taxes and no longer had the means to raise a substantial enough harvest to sell in the marketplace. As time passed, these landlords acquired more land. Small independent farming, the common form of agriculture during Pax Romana, disappeared as the people fell into debt with the government and could no longer pay taxes for their land. There was also the problem of attacks from Germanic tribesmen, which threatened their safety. Some fled from the area, leaving behind empty lots of land which the landowners would then claim as their own. Others would become tenant farmers to the landlords, looking for a way out of debt, violence, and starvation. Their villas provided safety from attacking German tribes and Roman brigands, a lighter tax burden, as well as the ability to make a living for oneself again. By becoming tenants, they would not need to learn a new trade and got the benefit of protection from both Germanic tribes and the Roman government. Either way, these wealthy landowners gained power, either in the form of land or human labor. As the increasing numbers of independent farmers became tenants, the landlord became their closest authority, not the Roman government. These landlords became more and more influential as more farmers came into the lands, lured by the promise of safety. They took much of the Roman population under their protection, which meant that the government had increasingly fewer resources for human labor, taxation, and army recruitment. These landowners also had incredible influence from the common people, as well as numerous social connections. This situation is reminiscent of the satraps' growing power in the Persian Empire or of the Confucian magnates in Han China. Although they were not profit-making landowners, they also had much influence from the people living on their land under their control, taking power away from the government. The Roman government was aware of the increasing power of the landlords, but as they were the ones paying majority of Roman taxes, they could not take too much power away from them. If they did make any moves against the landlords could very easily rise up and succeed in rebellion. However, it is clear that their power was a significant contributor to the breakdown of the central Roman government. As they leached resources and influence away from the state, the core of the Roman government weakened significantly.
As the Roman economy and centralized power of the government declined, so did the numbers and discipline of the Roman army. The average Roman in the late 2nd century and beyond didn't want to be in the army. As most were farmers, they did not think that they could abandon their land in order to fight. As the citizens started to die of plague, begin work as tenant farmers, or move away due to barbarian invasions, the Roman state was even further deprived of people to tax, as well as people to conscript. Because of the shortages in tax money, the government could not afford the higher salary numbers requested by the Romans. The lack of citizens to conscript also decreased the Roman army numbers in general. The government therefore had to rely on a different group of people, the Germanic tribes. In spite of the declining population, the army was still able to maintain its size due to the enlistment of barbarian tribes. Unfortunately, this ended up being a major factor in the fall of Rome. The barbarians were paid, but like the Roman citizens, they wanted increasing salaries. They also felt mistreated by the true Romans, which led to rebellions. Due to the inner army chaos, the western half of the Roman Empire was beginning to crumble and become more susceptible to invasions, and so after Theodosius, the last emperor to fully unite all of Rome, died, and it split back into east and west, the Germanic tribesmen were then able to invade the west.
Diocletian did many things, some being doubling the size of the army and heavily taxing the citizens to pay for this. However, the most important thing he did was deciding to split the Roman Empire into two halves, the east and the west. This new system was ruled by a tetrarchy, which is a system of ruling that had a senior ruler and a co-ruler/heir for each half of the empire. Therefore, each half could do whatever they wanted. Well, almost. Basically, each half managed themselves, and whatever the other half was doing didn't really affect them. This was fine for the East, which became richer from its control over trade routes and natural and military resources. The West mostly depended on the East for wealth and felt the loss of the East's support dramatically. As nomads invaded the hard-to-protect region, the West spent money on putting them down as well as spending money on putting down rebellions and usurpations at the same time. The East was more politically stable, so it didn't spend as much money on rebellions and usurpations as the West did. The East was also naturally protected, unlike the West. Constantinople, the capital of the East, was placed strategically where it could defend the East effectively. The East also had less riverbanks to cover. It only had the lower Danube region, as opposed to the West, which had the Rhine and the Danube. The combined geographical problems and the political instability of the West caused it to decline into deeper economic problems than the original "we have less money than the East" problem. Along with these problems, the silver value of the denarius was quickly falling. Emperor Nero had started debasing the denarius in 64 CE to the point where it became worthless when Diocletian came into power. Sometime during 200 CE, the silver content dropped even more. Because of this, inflation skyrocketed, and therefore prices rose. However, people's salaries weren't rising, so inflation destroyed the economy. As more Germanic tribesmen became part of the Roman army, the army demanded higher salaries. Therefore, the government taxed the people more to pay the army, but inflation's rapid rise made it hard for the people to pay the rising taxes. This caused the economy to deteriorate even more and impoverish the people. People running markets decided to raise prices because of inflation, and started going out of business because people didn't want to pay the higher prices. Eventually, the only markets that were still intact, food markets, suffered too. Since trade is a key part of wealth, the economy further declined from this. As the stereotype goes, rich people only care about themselves. And this was true in the 3rd century crisis, as the bureaucrats and government officials started using collected tax money for their own benefit. This meant the money that should have gone to paying the soldiers was going towards personal expenses, furthering the circle of economic distress Rome was in. When Constantine came into power, he decided to move the capital from Rome to Constantinople. Unlike Rome, Constantinople was great for controlling trade routes and military movement. Merchants would therefore follow the capital to its new location with better trade opportunities, depleting the West of merchants at the same time. And, like most everything previously mentioned, this added to the West's economic problems.
Over time, the army was increasingly made up of barbarians instead of Roman citizens. The ratio between the number of Germanic tribesmen and Roman citizens in the army in the Roman Empire was alarming. The mass numbers of barbarians in the army made a difference in the training quality. During the Pax Romana, all Roman soldiers went through the same extensive training process, learning much about Roman warfare. However, the later recruited barbarians were oftentimes not nearly as trained as the average Roman soldier, as Roman generals were less willing to train the barbarians. Roman battle tactics and styles were lost, and battles were now decided by the number of barbarians. Every barbarian fought not for the glory of Rome and dignitas, but for money and rank within the army. If they felt like they were not given what was promised, they would rebel from within the ranks of the army. The wealthier eastern half solved this problem by beginning to pay the external Germanic tribes to keep them from attacking, and killing the Germanic tribesmen in the army. While this left them vulnerable to attack, their wealth allowed them to purge the threat and buy time to rebuild their army. The West did not have the means to do this and were unsuccessful in most of their anti-Germanic tribe attempts. Therefore, the inner revolt continued. One of the most influential Germanic tribes who took this way of rebellion were the Visigoths. The Visigoths were Germanic tribes who were accepted into the army in 376 CE. They were on the run from the Huns who drove them out of Central Europe. They had been ingrained within the Roman ranks, making their attack on Rome more rebellion than invasion. In 410, a Visigoth leader named Alaric and his Goths sacked Rome and advanced on Spain, putting parts of Spain under Visigoth control. This attack was the first in a series of revolts from Germanic tribes that eventually led to the downfall of Rome, made easier by the weakened government system. Different Germanic tribes in the army rebelled and put parts of the empire under their control. The parts that were exempt from their power were under the control of the Roman landlords. This is like the fragmentation of Han China. Everyone was under someone else's control. In Rome, this continued until Odovaker and his tribe finally overthrew the seat of the empire, once and for all, in 476 CE. This state marks the traditionally accepted end of the Western Roman Empire. The once powerful state became a patchwork of different tribe-ruled territories. Although many of these Germans upheld Roman law codes and preserved the Roman culture and ideals until the Napoleonic conquests, the once powerful Roman Empire as anyone had known it had truly fallen.
The Roman Empire fell not due to outside invasion, but through inner turmoil and disintegration. When Diocletian split the empire in two, he started a procession of events that led to much higher taxes, inflation, and the downfall of the Roman economy. This led to mass numbers of tenant farmers taking land, money, and human resources away from the central Roman government. This, along with depopulation from plague and avoidance of Germanic attacks, led to lowering numbers in the Roman army, which in itself led to the hiring of Germanic tribes. As the Germanic tribe numbers increased and blotted out the number of Roman citizens in the army, they got increasingly out of hand. Tribes such as the Visigoths rebelled from inside the ranks, while other Germanic tribes took over different pieces of land from the Roman Empire. Eventually, all the land was under the control of different Germanic tribes or previous Roman landlords. The Roman seat of empire was overthrown by Odovacar in 476 CE, marking the commonly accepted date for the end of the Roman Empire. It remained fragmented until the Napoleonic conquest, but the legacy of Rome remains in modern Italy today.